What we've seen earlier this week is a bipartisan letdown, really, when it comes to dealing with the aftermath of the Bondi attack. It was messy, it was acrimonious, and it was highly political. Now we have the coalition split for the foreseeable future. Susan Lee's leadership looking like it is not going to last the week, and One Nation on the rise. I want to bring in Redbridge Group Director Simon Welsh now. Simon, given all that context, what are you seeing in the polls, particularly when it comes to One Nation, and what feedback are you getting in those focus groups about that party in particular?
Yeah, thanks, Laura. It certainly is a heady start to the year. So what we've seen, the issue here is really around conservative voting working class, particularly men, not only, but particularly men and men in that sort of Gen X, younger boomer kind of cohort. I might take you very quickly on a bit of a sort of a history journey here, because you've got to understand the history journey to understand what's happening. These are voters that jumped on the Liberal and the coalition broader pile back in the time of Howard. And so these were voters that often came off Labor, working class, but conservative voting, conservative social values, jumped on Howard because of the economic promise, the aspirational promise of the Howard government. And so what's happened since that time is slowly that aspiration has eroded, through economic circumstances. They were still there for Morrison in 2019. This is a cohort that was instrumental in saving Morrison's bacon in 2019 against that Bill Shorten election, where Bill Shorten was favoured to win. But the economic shocks that have come, and sort of COVID, the subsequent cost of living crisis you can think of as the last straw, has really eroded that. So that cohort has now become quite sort of drawn to anti-establishment populist kind of politics. And that sort of opens the door to One Nation. The mistake that the coalition has made over the past 6 months or so is that it has tried to reach back to those sorts of voters by reaching to their grievance, which is sort of where they are. It's grievance, populist politics that they're craving. And the coalition has tried to reach back to them on that basis, talking about things like immigration, rather than reaching back with an economic pitch. And what that does, and we see this in the groups, is that just reinforces to those voters that grievance, that is an important and thing for them to be voting on and to be thinking about. And that just drives them into the heart of One Nation, because the coalition has been worried about what's happening on its moderate flank. It can never scratch that itch in a way that One Nation can. Right. So that's what sort of this is the pump that's pushing those voters towards One Nation. Now, the problem for the National Party in particular is that proportionally there are more of those sorts of voters in this regional centres, especially, than there are even proportionally in sort of suburban Australia. So it is a particular problem. It's a problem for both Liberal and the Nationals, but it is a particular problem for the Nationals, and hence we're seeing the sort of the divisions that we're seeing today.
Base politics, though, Simon, this move from David Littleproud today, if an election were to be held tomorrow, would it help the Nationals in retaining and gaining seats?
It kind of depends on where the Nationals go from here. Right. I think that's a great unknown. I think it's going to take time for them to if it results in them somehow sort of a different positioning, different policy settings, a different pitch back to these voters, it could help them. I still think that pitch has to be economic at its heart. If they try and just become another version of One Nation, well, why wouldn't you go for the original?
Just quickly, Simon. I mean, you've said that a lot before. If they're going to vote One Nation, and One Nation are going to go hard. Barnaby Joyce has a personal grievance, and he's made that clear. He's made David Littleproud's life a little bit harder this week, I would say. But if I could quickly, because we are running out of time, ask you about the PM, the Labor Party, and the skin that has come off the Labor Party and the Prime Minister in particular over this summer.
Yeah, I think that's interesting as well. I mean, we're only just sort of starting to get into the groups. Things have got to wash through. But very quickly, I would say I actually think the coalition has done Labor a favour, not just because of this dysfunction, but that certainly helps. But people at this time of year really aren't engaged in the detail of what's going on within politics. So you've got to come back. What's the helicopter view that people are taking out of what's happened over the course of the summer? And the helicopter view is Labor put forward some bills to deal with anti-Semitism and extremism. The right thought that that was too strong and needed some watering down, and has forced the Labor into compromise. That hurts the right more than it hurts the government, because what people are looking for were that strong, comforting response from the government on anti-Semitism and extremism, and the fact that the right is now seeming to break up around that issue, I think, sort of reinforces to the electorate that what the government proposed here was actually pretty strong. So I think the coalition, on a couple of ways, has actually helped put some of that skin back on.
Simon, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Laura.